praise, endless praise. Yahweh, Yahweh, we love to shout your name. Hi folks, if you're just joining us online, welcome. Good to see you here. We're just having a short time of worship and prayer before we break off into the different seminars. So this is going on in the main cafe. I'll just take you outside. Your name, creation sings your story. At your name, angels will bow, the earth will rejoice, your people cry out. All the earth will shout your name, filling up the skies with endless praise, endless praise. Yahweh, Yahweh, we love to shout your name, oh Lord. There's no one like our God. We will praise you, praise you. There's no one like our God. We will sing, there is no one like our God. We will praise you, praise you. There's no one like our God. We will sing. Lord of all the earth, we shout your name, filling up the skies with endless praise, endless praise. Yahweh, Yahweh, we love to shout your name, oh Lord. We shout your name, filling up the skies with endless praise, endless praise. Yahweh, Yahweh, we love to shout your name, oh Lord.
Two of us would like to lead some time of thanks and praise. Great.
Ever worthy you are, Lord. Ever worthy.
Amen.
Thank you, Lord, that we have that opportunity, that liberty to shout your name. Thank you, Father, for your great love to us. We pray that you will help us in our time now to worship you. Thank you, Lord, that you are the maker of heaven and earth, and yet we desire to have a relationship with each one of us. Lord, we thank you tonight for your grace and your goodness and your mercy to us. Help us, Lord, we pray, to give you thanks in your precious name. Amen. We're going to sing Blessed Be Your Name. Okay. In the name of
Blessed be your name, the land that is plentiful, with streams of abundance flow. Blessed be your name. Blessed be your name, found in the desert place, the walk through the wilderness. Blessed be your name. Every blessing you pour out, I'll turn back to grace. When the darkness closes in on, still I will say, blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. be your glorious name. Blessed be your name. The sun shining down on me. The world's all as it should be. Blessed be your name. Blessed be your name. Don't mark with suffering. Was pain in the offering. Blessed be your name. Every blessing you pour out, turn back to praise. When the darkness closes in, Lord, still I will say, blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. Of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. Give and take away. Give and take away. Heart will choose to say, oh, blessed be your name. Take away. Give and take away. Heart will choose to say, blessed be your name. Of the Lord, blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name.
The final one. Consuming fire. There must be more than this. Breath of God, come breathe within. There must be more than this. Oh, breath of God, come breathe within. Fill us anew, we pray. Fill us anew, we pray. Consuming fire, fire into flame. A passion for your name. Spirit of God, fall in this place. Lord, have your way. Lord, have your way with us. Come like a rushing wind, blow us with power from. Now set the captives free. Lead us about to your praise. Lord, let your glory fall. Lord, let your glory fall. Consuming fire, fire into flame. Our passion for your name. Spirit of God, fall in this place. Lord, have your way. way. Lord, have your way with us. Stir it up in our hearts, Lord. Stir it up in our hearts, Lord. Stir it up in our hearts, passion for your name. Stir it up in our hearts, Lord. Stir it up in our hearts, Lord. Stir it up in our hearts, with passion for your name. Consuming fire, find into flame. Passion for your name. Spirit of God, fall in this place. Lord, have your way. Lord, have your way with us. Yes, Lord, that's our prayer tonight, that you will have your way with each one of us. Lord, we thank you for this time that we've had and we're going to have right now in your presence. We pray, Holy Spirit, you will come. Indeed, you will fan into flame that passion. Yes, Lord. Teach us, Lord. Help us to be open to what you want to say to us, that we may go away from this place changed and transformed by the Lord and your Spirit. We ask this and we give you thanks in Jesus' precious name. Amen.
Amen.
Just be thanks, James, very much for that. Just to say, people are thinking, what's going to happen now because one's finishing? Well, stop questioning the second row. Sorry. As Tim mentioned on Sunday, we've got the launch of the new life groups. We've been working very hard under the beams of Tim and I, and we've got the brochures available this Sunday, which details the different various groups that are available for you to see, and in a couple of weeks' time you can sign on. But you can actually, if you want a sneak preview, you can go online. It's Church Suite, isn't it? Church Suite.
On just the Bournemouth
Just
Church
on
website.
Under BCC, you can find it. It'll tell you more about it. Each group will tell you who they are, the people who run it, what day of the week, whether it's or fortnightly or weekly, etc. A little bit more about the group that week there. So please, you can sign up right now, or as soon as you can, and then, as I said, the brochures will be available next Sunday onwards. I think you all know where they're going, isn't it? Prophecies in here. The David and Maureen are in the front. I'm in the park down there. Dave's upstairs. Lorna's in the chair. Sorry, Tim, you're in there. Great, have a lovely time. Fantastic time. Thank you very much. Great.
Okay. Well, this is our last evening together. I hope it's worked out okay online. I know it's dropped in and out a little bit occasionally, so sorry about that, but really glad that some of you have been able to join us online as well. If you want notes for this evening's session, we're talking about celebration and then finishing well, then you can click on the link, which is somewhere down here, and you will find the notes available for you there. People are just starting to arrive now. Come on in, Glenn. So far it is. Yeah. And there's a few people joining online as well. Yeah. You all right, Simon? Well, absolutely, yeah. For the millions that are tuning in.
Oh, I like this one.
Celebration.
Feasting.
Yes.
Yeah, well, we've done the fasting. We're now
Well,
on the feasting.
exactly. Oh, right.
Celebrate.
Celebrate.
Should have done that as we came in, shouldn't you? Should have been playing that. Benches.
The back benches, like, you're on the back benches now, really.
Right, honourable Lord Hurley. Gentlemen. It used to be on. It's easy to break.
Right, welcome all.
Come on in. There's a space here, Barry. Finishing well. Feasting.
Fasting.
I meant to practice these now, so we'll practice. Stuff your face. Think
It
of
doesn't
Jesus.
say that. So
Feasting, it's just, yeah.
it comes into mind, doesn't it?
Expresses getting your fill, doesn't it? It's a feast. You wouldn't go and put a plate sandwich to the exact feast. Well, it's a birthday boy. You could have a nice bunny steak sandwiches. Yeah. What's those big T-bone steaks just in between two bits of bread? There's a plate for them.
Okay, are we all here?
Yes, sir.
Yep, everybody happy?
I wouldn't say that. Come on.
Right.
Yes, that's the one, Barry.
Is there one else that I think yes, 1 year ago.
Okay, is everybody happy? Okay, well, we made it to the end, week 4. This is our final session together. And it's been helpful, really kind of enjoyed doing this with you. Just thinking about the spiritual disciplines. And so what we're going to do this evening is talk about celebration as the kind of final spiritual discipline that we'll talk about, and then kind of finishing well in the spiritual life in ministry as we kind of look to the end and how that can help us with the perspective of now. We'll come to that in a little bit, and then we'll have a bit of time for maybe just random other thoughts and comments, questions, queries, etc. at the end. So that's the kind of plan for this evening, and we'll just kind of see how we go. Of course, as we said, I think in the first week when we looked at the introduction to spiritual disciplines, this is not supposed to be an exhaustive list. So, over the past 4 weeks, we've looked at, reading a Bible, praying. We've looked at fasting, simplicity, solitude, all of these kind of different things, which I think we've covered most of what would generally be termed the classic spiritual disciplines. But as we said in the first week, spiritual disciplines can be anything that help us to grow in our, and to not just help us to grow in our walk with God, but help us to really, how can I put this? They help us to develop our spiritual life for growth in Christ. Does that make sense? So this is really, I do think the analogy of the kind of, we grow our physical muscles through exercise, and it's often when they get to the breaking point that they really start to grow. Similarly, I think when spiritual disciplines become really hard, that's when we really start to grow in those as well. And I think there's a really good analogy there. Anyway, so, but there are also, spiritual disciplines can be, as we talked about in the first week, can be other things as well that help us to grow in our spirituality. So, celebration and finishing well. This is a good one to end on, I think, isn't it? Celebration. Feasting, first of all, then. Feasting in some sense is the opposite of fasting, and yet they both seek to promote a right understanding of pleasure. We were created for pleasure, and yet our highest pleasure is in God. That's that verse there, Psalm 16, at his right hand are pleasures forevermore. And, what fasting does is helps us to remove substitute and lesser delights that we might fully delight in God. And when we feast, we are enjoying the good pleasures. And if we view feasting in a right sense, that can, it's about our enjoyment of the good gifts that God has given us. Now, of course, as with this, with any of the spiritual disciplines, we can take them to extreme where they become unhealthy. Fasting can become unhealthy, feasting can become unhealthy, but and I think we've said this as we've gone through talking about the spiritual disciplines, that it's much more about our inner attitude to these things. And so this is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. So there's a spiritual discipline of feasting, of celebrating, spiritual discipline of joy even. And I've given you the quote there from Gareth Gilgerson, who's the lead singer in Wren Collective. You come across Wren Collective band? He says joy. Oh, and he's talking here about Wren Collective released a song, the joy of the Lord is our strength. The joy of the Lord is our strength. And so he talks about that song and he says, joy is a spiritual discipline. We as a people are much more inclined toward negativity and cynicism. Isn't that true? It's true of me. We don't find it easy or natural to pursue joy. And that's why God in his kingdom actually commands us to celebrate. Sorry? God in his word. Sorry, you're right. God in his word actually commands us to celebrate. Thanks, Rob. We come by a gospel worth celebrating before a celebrating king. We need to get down to the serious business of joy. We must wrestle for our blessing. We must fight for our joy. And so that song there, the joy of the Lord is my strength, which, as you'll know, comes from the book of Nehemiah, where Nehemiah tells the people, the joy of the Lord is my strength. And that's a verse perhaps, or a statement that we quote quite easily, the joy of the Lord is our strength. But remember, this is that was written at a time when the people were struggling with their identity, who they were. They were the Israelites, the Jews were an exiled people, and now they're coming back out of Babylonian captivity, back into Jerusalem, back to Israel. They're rebuilding the city walls. They're doing all this kind of thing. They're facing opposition, very limited resources, all this kind of stuff, difficult conditions. And so, it's not a trite statement for them, right? It's not something that they just, like we might do today, stick it on a postcard and then it goes on your fridge. Actually, this was something that they're having to live through and make the decision for joy. A guy called Ajith Fernando, who I think was a missionary in the Philippines, or I could be wrong about that, Indonesia, somewhere in East Asia there. He said about that verse, the joy of the Lord is my strength. When the joy goes, the strength goes. That's interesting, isn't it? That having joy in God brings strength to us. And so joy is a spiritual discipline. And the idea here of celebrating, enjoying joy in the daily ups and downs of life, in the daily humdrum of people's, it doesn't come naturally to us. I think who was that? Gareth Gilgerson is probably right that we're much more inclined toward negativity and cynicism. It doesn't come naturally to us. And so the discipline of celebration is, in a right sense, a discipline, because it's about taking joy in the daily business of life. John Ortberg, you would have heard me mention him a number of times through this, because he's written a great book on the spiritual disciplines called The Life You've Always Wanted. He talks about the fact that God is a joyful God, and that you see this from the very earliest pages in Scripture when God is creating. He looked and he saw what he'd made, and he saw that it was good. He's delighting in what he's doing. He's delighting in his work. And John Ortberg imagines, he paints the picture of, what if God treated the work of creation like we sometimes treat our jobs, and so John Ortberg paints this picture of God saying, like, right, I've made a trout. Yeah, I suppose it's okay. I don't need to bother making any more fish because that'll do the job, But actually, what we see in creation is God, he's just delighting to, create all this stuff. He's delighting in his work. He's delighting in making a creation that we would enjoy. Is this making sense? Any thoughts or comments or questions? How are we doing there?
I just think that with creation, when you look at the colours, the
Yes.
flowers, the birds, especially tropical birds,
Yes.
and
Yes.
the animals, some of them are so weird.
Yes.
You think God really is sort of up the swanning with his phone.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because they're fantastic.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
an imagination. What,
Yeah.
and I just love it. I love
Yeah.
creation.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that reflects his joyful character more than anything.
Definitely. And that's just reminded me, of the different animals. It just reminds me of something I saw on Twitter a while ago, who's imagining God telling the angels how to make the animals. And it's things like, make a cow bear. And the angel's like, what? A cow bear? You heard me. And that becomes the panda, and stuff, stuff like this, take a little thing and put spikes all over it. And there's the head, and anyway, it's a joy. You can see it, can't you?
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. It's not functional,
No.
right? It's joyful. And so God is a God of celebration. And so I think what the discipline of joy is about, the discipline of celebration, there's some specific things about it, but I can't remember who said this now. I wrote it down, but then I forgot to attribute this. So sorry, this is plagiarism. Someone said it, that the discipline of celebration anchors us to a bigger story. It anchors us to a bigger story. It helps us to realize that, I don't know if this is true for anybody else, but when I get sick, when I get ill, even if it's just man flu, which is obviously very serious, but when you get ill, you stop caring. The things that you care about gets a lot smaller, doesn't it? Does this make sense?
Yeah.
It's harder to think about other people when you're unwell, and all you want to do is just get through this day, and your world starts to collapse a little bit. It starts to get smaller. Is that true? Do you know what? I suppose it does, but
you've got these big responsibilities, you do feel rotten that you're going to go on.
Well, yes, I suppose, yeah, maybe it's just, maybe it's just me.
Been up for all of us.
But I think, and the same thing that happens, I think, when we get low emotionally or we get low spiritually, we start to care less about other things, don't we? It's harder to show compassion towards other people when you're feeling sorry for yourself, and I think what joy tries to do is just reawaken us and remind us there's more going on. So how do we cultivate joy? How do we grow this discipline of joy in us? What does it actually mean? And I think you see some real hints of this in the Old Testament, in the celebrations that were set up in the calendar of Israel's life, in their annual calendar. What the feasts were set up for is primarily feasts of thankfulness, right? Feasts of remembrance, feasts of, we thank God for what he's done. So, the Passover feast, we thank God for what he's done. The Day of Atonement, we thank God that we're free. The Feast of Booths, we remember at the time when we lived in tents, but now we've got this land. All these different feasts set up. What's the first thing that Joshua did when he's crossed the Jordan River? They've seen the miraculous provision for God. Yes, we've got this land. Before they do a single thing, we put the stones up. We build a memorial, right? And this is going to be, says God, this is going to be a memorial for generations to come, that this is what God has done. So thankfulness cultivates joy. And if we want to grow in joy and celebration, I think we've got to say, it's not just about feasting. It is about feasting, and enjoying. That's part of, I'm thankful for this provision that God has given us, right? And so it is thankfulness that I think you see throughout the Bible, and celebration and weddings and so on play a big part in the Bible, because they are places where we can be thankful, places of celebration. Jesus enjoyed a lot of those things as well. So I think it's important that we do this and take it seriously, get down to the serious business of joy, as Ren Collective guy says. Fight for joy. Fight for joy. I think that's a good phrase. Any thoughts or questions about that?
Is this a lifestyle thing as well?
Go on, Rob. Unpack that a little bit.
Well, I guess I'm just reflecting on what you said about, God and his delight in creation. I'm not particularly creative, but I can understand the joy that people get out of being creative who have creative gifts.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if part of it is again, an attitude thing where you train
Definitely.
your heart to be
Yeah.
looking for things to delight in.
Yeah, definitely. There's a great book by a lady called Anne Voskamp. Has anyone come across this, called 1000 Gifts? It's a bit flowery, but well, she writes in a very kind of
Joyful.
yeah, I suppose. Well, so there's this lady called Anne Voskamp. She's going through a really difficult period in life, and she felt challenged by God to write down over the course of several months 1,000 gifts, 1,000 things to be thankful for. And so she keeps a journal, and every one of them is numbered, and she shares some of them with you, and they are little flowery things, like number 348, for example. I saw the beautiful colours in the bubbles of the washing up liquid, and she says it in a lot more flowery way than that. So she writes this very kind of poetic sort of way. But what she's trying to do through this kind of exercise, this gratitude journal exercise, is learn to cultivate thankfulness, learn to grow in thankfulness, which leads that kind of that joyful celebrating discipline, really.
It's like that gentleman who was in prison. It's a well-known quote, isn't it? He looked through prison bars. No, 2 men looked down through prison bars. One saw mud and one saw stone.
Absolutely.
And it's your attitude, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
And as he says, it doesn't come naturally to us. This isn't something that comes easily. I think we are naturally, as human beings, more inclined towards seeing the pessimistic side, as some more than others, aren't we? People are on a scale in that, but I think this is a discipline. This is a discipline, but an important one. And Roger'd probably not enjoy me sharing this, but the tithes in the Old Testament, I don't know if any of you have ever seen this. When I saw this, it blew my mind a little bit. The tithes in the Old Testament, part of their purpose was for celebration, right?
The tithe.
Tithe.
Oh, tithe. Sorry.
Just listen to this.
Coming in there.
Just listen to this. You shall tithe. This is from Deuteronomy 14. You shall tithe all the yield of your seed that comes from the field year by year. And before the Lord your God, in the place that he will choose to make his name dwell there, you will eat the tithe of your grain, of your wine, and of your oil, and the firstborn of your herd and flock, that you may learn to fear the Lord your God always. So what are they going to do? They're going to give 10% of their wine, their flock, stuff like this, and they're going to use it to have a party together, right? But listen, it goes on. But if the way is too far, so if the place is too far from, where the designated tithe collecting station, right? If that's too far for you to go to, so you're not able to carry the tithes, then when the Lord your God blesses you, because the place is too far for you, which the Lord your God chooses. So, if the tithe collection station is too far, this is what you're going to do. Now, just listen to this. Turn it into money. So sell your wheat, your grain, your wine, and so on. Turn it into money and bind up the money in your hand, okay? And then go to the place the Lord your God chooses. So turn it into money. So you don't have to take all your chickens and your wheat with you. Turn it into money. Then you go to the tithe collecting station, okay? What do you do when you get there? Then spend the money for whatever you desire. I'm not making this up. Oxen or sheep or wine or strong drink. And whatever your appetite
in my Bible.
and whatever your appetite craves. And you shall eat there before the Lord your God and rejoice. Margaret's like, this can't be in the Bible.
Yeah, no,
I'm reading it for myself.
And rejoice, you and your household. And you shall not neglect the Levite who is within your towns, for he has no portion or inheritance with you. Isn't that interesting? You haven't noticed that before? That-
Several times, but yeah.
I know. You know, so the purpose isn't that. So this is Deuteronomy 14 verses 22 to 26, and I even put the notes, the verses there in the notes there. I think.
But that's
You know.
the Timnida version.
I'm reading it straight out there. You know, so in other words, you know, the tithes are given, at least in part, and that you should celebrate. That you should celebrate. You know, with whatever your heart desires. You know, what you crave. So of course there were other times in the year where they would fast. Okay, and we got to put this in perspective. We got to see this in balance and all the rest of it. But actually, the celebration of enjoying the good gifts that God gives us is right there, and it quite clearly, as far as my Bible is concerned, includes wine and strong drink. So, you know,
In
beer.
moderation.
Well, funnily enough, it doesn't say that. But I'm not.
What are you teaching? Yeah, festivals are fine.
So, celebrate then. Joy cultivated by thankfulness. I think, I don't know if any of you have ever tried this. It's easier said than done, I think. You know, I kept a journal for a little while. After I read this book, 1000 Gifts, I thought, right, I'm going to give this a go. And sometimes it's hard. At the end of the day, I get my little journal out and try and think of 3 or 4 things that I want to be thankful for. And sometimes it's hard, but that says much more about me than it does about God, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
You know, that
You're just taking things for granted.
Exactly. You know, and so much to be thankful for when we stop and think about it. Okay, any thoughts or comments on celebration, feasting, tithing, or should we move on to finishing well? What do you think?
I think it's quite thinking about it. Small reflection there. Just actually when you, either myself thanking God for things, or when people have those prayers of thankfulness, there is that steady kind of growing in joy in their tone or their voice or in themselves, isn't there? There's just thinking about it, like you. I don't know that you were thanking earlier on today and praying, but there was a change in your tone. Where actually we just begin to see actually there are things to be thankful for, and then there is that bubbling up of joy, however you want to describe it. So I think that was really helpful to think about. Actually, there really is a link between our thankfulness to God for whatever He has provided or whatever. Counting our blessings is so important in cultivating thankfulness that cultivates that joy, which I do agree. I definitely think it's a lifestyle thing, an attitude thing.
Because often it comes from person. Because I can remember at another church when we used to go visiting the elderly, there are some places that you go to with lead in your boots because you knew all you were going to get is whining and moaning and negative, just talk about them, and there's themselves, and there's other people you go to who are in a really difficult situation, and you come out of there as if you were floating on air. Do you know, they were more of a blessing to you than you were to them, and that was sort of ingrained in their character. And you know, and I used to say, "Oh, look,
now that's interesting, Margaret, and that phrase you used there. I think they're ingrained in their character. I think there's a certain amount in which, you know, that's true, that is just part of the character, but I think it's still a discipline. And I think when people are, some people are probably more glass half empty than glass half full people, just as a kind of natural disposition, you know, their upbringing or whatever. But I would argue that everybody can become people of joy. And whether you start life as a glass half empty person or a glass half full person, I think I would still argue that the discipline of joy, the discipline of celebration, the discipline of thankfulness, all the things that we've been talking about, can lead us to become those people, even if that's not who we are naturally. And I think there is a discipline. That's what celebration is. What would be one of the classic disciplines.
I think you can influence other people as well.
Completely agree.
Wow.
It's totally infectious.
It is.
Yeah.
So I come across some miserable people in my job,
I bet you do.
and the challenge is to actually get them to smile.
Yeah.
And it's quite interesting. It's I delivered to quite a number of brethren people.
Oh golly.
Yeah. And I think, my goodness me, you don't have the joy of the Lord here.
Yeah.
But I've been doing this route for quite a while now, and there's one or two of them I actually get smiles.
You're
out
turning
of.
around, are you,
Yes.
Graham? Bit day by day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when you actually get, I don't know, a miserable person
Mm.
to actually smile,
Mm.
the whole character just
Yeah.
changes. Doesn't
Yeah.
it? It's a totally different person.
Well, I read a book once where they did a study where they got people to put pencils in their mouths, right, like a cross, like that,
Yeah.
which forces a bit of a smile. And what they found was that through, I don't know how they measured it or whatever, but people responded more positively to questions than people who didn't have the pencil in the mouth, because just the physical act of smiling, even if it's forced,
Yeah.
changes
As well.
your. Yeah, is that weird?
For some people, need a coat hanger.
So
Big man.
First job.
yeah, go on,
that I
John.
had, I was an apprentice. Well, I hadn't started my apprenticeship. I was 15, and they needed this particular bar of steel,
Hmm.
which was called silver steel.
Mhm.
It's it's ground finish and it's precise size. And I had to go and pick it up out. I had to go on the underground out this is in London, out in the middle of nowhere, and picked up this end of the district line or somewhere.
Mm.
Picked up this piece of metal. Got on the underground. There might have been one person in the carriage.
Mm.
And I thought, I sat at the end because then I knew I could hold this piece of
Mhm.
steel, inch diameter.
Mhm.
So I'm sitting there, train started, got in at this couple of stations down the line, and someone got on, train jolted, they grabbed hold of the bar.
Mm.
And of course it moved because it was me
Yeah.
holding it.
Yeah.
And gradually, as the train got further along the line, people were on the train and they were glued to this. Every time someone got on, they were looking to see if they grabbed hold of it. And they were falling about now.
You're creating a little bit of joy there.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. That's great. And I think it is something that we need to be intentional about, isn't it? Because I think we'll quickly become miserable people if we don't do that. And as we've been saying all along, this is about our inner attitude, but it is cultivated, and it's not just about being a positive person. We're talking about something far more deeper than that. We're talking about joy in the Lord, which is deeper, which is a settled state of soul. Deliberately, we're using the word joy and not happiness, of course, because happiness comes from the English word "hap," which is about your happenings, what happens to you, and so on. So it goes beyond circumstance. So the people in Nehemiah's day, joy of the Lord, terrible circumstances, but still the joy of the Lord giving them strength. So it goes beyond just a positive outlook. Okay, wanted to spend a bit of time talking about finishing well then, and spiritual life in ministry, and the importance that we think about the end. We think about that day when we hopefully hear the Lord saying to us, "Well done, good and faithful servant," because I think it's important that we look up to the end and not only at the now. Kenneth Boer says here this: once we have committed our lives to Christ, there should be no turning back. Indeed, if we think about it, there is nothing of real and lasting substance to which we can turn apart from him. In spite of this truth, there's an epidemic of believers who drop out of the race during their middle years. Many begin well but finish poorly. It can be a gradual erosion through a series of small compromises or a more sudden point of departure, but any number of things can divert us from the course on which we are called to run. And I think what the spiritual disciplines do, when we see them in the right place, is they will help to develop our muscles so that we will run, to continue that metaphor on a little bit. I read, any thoughts or any questions about that before we jump into this? The idea of finishing well. I want to read this because I read this the other day, and I just thought this kind of sums up a lot of what we're talking about with the spiritual disciplines and why they're important. So this is a guy, Wayne Cordero, who's talking about, well, it'll become fairly obvious. Some years ago, I prepared for one of the most grueling water races in the ocean around Hawaii. It's a 41-mile canoe race across a treacherous channel between the islands of Molokai and Oahu called the Kaiwi Channel. The currents run swift and the waves can be over 8 feet high, sometimes pushing boats into the cliffs on the east shore of the island. My training regimen began 8 months before the race. I ran, I lifted weights, dieted and paddled for hours. My endurance increased and I worked on improving my ability to weather fatigue. Several times I ran for 3 to 4 hours in the noonday sun to build my stamina. I wanted to persevere and finish the race. So what's he talking about there? He's talking about the discipline of physical exercise and endurance, aiming for the race. You know, the goal is not the endurance, the goal is to run the race, right? It's exactly what we've been talking about with the spiritual disciplines. Now listen to this, because he goes on to talk about the race day. Finally, the day of the race arrived. At 6:30 a.m., more than 100 canoes were at the starting line and a green flag signaled the start. Paddles hit the water with force and the 5-hour event was underway. The racers were focused, sprinting ahead as escort boats paced us along the way. The first hour, we ran on pure adrenaline. By the second hour, we had to dig a bit deeper. By the third hour, the sun began taking its toll and several paddlers dropped behind in exhaustion. By the fourth hour, dehydration set in for some, and the line of canoes started thinning out. At that point, I started to wonder why I'd ever signed up for this tiring race. Everything in me began shutting down, one muscle group at a time. I struggled to breathe in the heat of the sun, and everything was intensified by the glare of the ocean. My arms and back cramped. I found that I couldn't distinguish between hallucination and reality, and I honestly thought I saw a couple of mermaids swim by. They were most likely tiger sharks, but nevertheless, they looked like they were having a whole lot more fun than I was. So what's he talking about here? He's talking about he's trained for this race, and he's getting, 2/3, 3/4 of the way through this race, and he's got really intensely tough. Just as I reached the point of giving up, abandoning ship and calling for the escort boat, a clear thought came to me. This is what I've been training for. Not just for the race, it's all been for this moment in the race. This is what all the dieting had been for. All the weights and the marathons in the heat of the day, all of my training was for this precise moment. Now this is what I think is interesting. I hadn't trained for the first hour. I had plenty of energy then. And my training wasn't for the end of the race. I knew there would be plenty of well-wishers there to encourage me. No, it was for this very moment when no one else was around. I had trained to push through the time when there is no one cheering, when everything inside of me is telling me to quit. This is exactly what I've been practicing for. He goes on to say, no one trains for a vacation. No one practices for a vacation. You don't need to prepare for something like taking a nap. No, you prepare for that point in the race when you're depleted and fatigue has beaten you down. You prepare for the moment when you want to quit, when you're tempted to be unfaithful to your wife or stomp out of a board meeting in anger. These moments are why we listen to hundreds of sermons, read dozens of books, and we could say these moments are why we fast, these moments are why we pray, these moments are why we dig deep into God, so we will finish our race well. So that when we're in that middle of the race and we're tempted to give up, it's the discipline that I have trained my spirit through fasting, through prayer, through celebration, through taking joy, through solitude, through simplicity, through all these things that we've been talking about and a host of others that we haven't. It's for those moments that my spirit is trained to keep running that race with perseverance. Is this making sense?
Mm.
And I thought as I read that, I mean, that just kind of hit me, you know. He says, I realized in that moment that if I dropped out of the canoe race in the final hour, it would nullify the hundreds of hours I had put into preparing. Suddenly, it was like nitric oxide had been added to my tank. I felt refreshed and invigorated, and I dug that paddle in deep water with a new lease on life. It was my best race ever. Isn't that interesting? And I think that's all the spiritual disciplines that we have looked at over this, you know, I know this has been a super brief overview. All the spiritual disciplines that we've looked at are training us for those moments in our spiritual race where we are tempted to compromise, where we are tempted to give up, where we're tempted to, you know, call it quits, where we're tempted to, you know, abandon ship because things have got hard, right? You know, and we're not seeing things clearly. So I think that's really what the purpose of the spiritual disciplines are. You know, it's easy to follow Christ when things are going swimmingly, right? You know, and as he said, the training isn't for the first hour because, you know, it's just energy. I can do that in my own strength. You know, training wasn't for the last hour because, you know, those crowds would cheer us over the line. Training is for the moments when we're on our own, when we're most tempted to quit. And you know, if anything, you know, my only hope for these 4 weeks that we've had together is that you know, it helps us to think about using these spiritual disciplines in our spiritual life that we might be strong for those moments. That's the goal here.
That's an excellent illustration.
Isn't it? Yeah. I just found that really, really helpful. You know, it's for those moments because that's so true, isn't it? You know, when we're gathered around here, we all feel strong in Christ, don't we? You know, we have a great conversation, but when I'm on my own, or you know, storms of life, and I don't feel like I've got my Christian community around me.
Confirmation.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah. That's good.
When I look back, everything I've done has been led. Been led by my master, but I've listened. I haven't always immediately obeyed.
Yeah.
But when I have obeyed, I've seen the joy of completing something that benefited not just me, but other people.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Very good. Very good. And I think that, you know, often in our lives, and I think particularly for us, you know, in a wealthy country, Christianity can often become this world orientated, you know, because we have it, you know, fairly good, don't we, on the whole, and actually the Bible encourages us to have a next worldly orientation, and to recognize that we are, you know, there's an old hymn, isn't there? I'm just a passing through, you know, that kind of, we're strangers and aliens in this world, and we're just kind of passing through. And I think there's something very healthy about having a preoccupation with the next world and a preoccupation with eternity. You know, we sometimes say disparagingly of people that they're too heavenly minded to be of any earthly use, where what we mean is they're too pious, basically, isn't it? Actually, the most earthly used people are those who are heavenly minded, I would say, when we see from biblical perspective. Jonathan Edwards, the New England preacher, not the triple jumper, in the 17th, 18th century. He when he was in his late teens, early 20s, he came up with a list of resolutions for his life, you know, and so many of them are designed to orientate his life towards eternity. So he says things like resolved, and this is the way he writes, resolved to think often of the horrors of hell and the glories of heaven. In other words, I want to live my life, to think about my life in such a way that I'm aware that it's not just about the 70, 80, 90 years I have here. He often writes that resolved, and there's that spiritual discipline of looking forwards, that spiritual discipline of anticipating our future with Christ. And so Kenneth Bower goes on to say, 7 characteristics of people who finish the race well. They have an intimacy with Christ. This doesn't happen outside of intimacy with Christ. The spiritual disciplines are not meant to be divorced from knowing intimately and having a relationship with Jesus. So it's no good, as Paul said, if I speak in the tongues of men and angels and I prophesy and I do this and that, but I don't have love, just what's the point? So intimacy with Christ, faithfulness in the fidelity in the spiritual disciplines. So faithfully practicing the spiritual disciplines, because again, that's what's going to keep us going. That's what's going to build up the spiritual muscle for the times when things are really tricky. Biblical perspective on the circumstances of life. And what he means by that is it is in that I'm seeing my circumstances against the backdrop of eternity, right? So the things that I'm going through, no matter how great or how bad they may seem at the time, they are a speck in the ocean against the drop of eternity. And so it's seeing, it's having a biblical perspective on the circumstances of life. Teachable, responsive, humble, and obedient spirit. Clear sense of personal purpose and calling. Healthy relationships with resourceful people, and ongoing ministry investment in the lives of others. So those are the characteristics that he talks about of people who finish the race well. Well,
can I? The other day, biblical perspective on the circumstances of life. The other day, the 23rd Psalm, and we all know the chapter from the inside out. And it starts off, the Lord, it's so personal. The Lord is my shepherd. So he's talking to believers. Right? And then it gets down to that line which says, when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And I was thinking about that, and I thought, golly, for the believer, death is a shadow. It hasn't got any substance. A shadow has no substance.
Yeah.
Death has no substance for us because we go straight into eternal life with Jesus.
Yeah.
And it was just a different way. It suddenly hit me.
Yeah.
You read something so often.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, God brings something fresh to me. And that really impacted me.
That's very good.
Yeah.
That's very good. Yeah.
The shadow, no substance.
Absolutely. That's good. Any other thoughts or comments?
I think you finished it well, Tim.
Finished well the course. Well, that is spiritual disciplines in a nutshell. I'm not going to. I commend that to you. And if there's anything else you want to chat about, we've got a few minutes if you want to, or we can quit and have an early night. Has it been one of those weeks, is it, where things are just a little bit tiring? We're all feeling a little bit like that. I can't get that sense, or is that?
We could bring all our ties together and have a party next week if you want.
Yeah. I mean, that's the whole point of Beer and Bible. So, sign up and get involved, Bring your tithes.
Bring your tithes. Strong beer.
We're going to drink strong beer, strong drink.
It's said about remembering the Levites.
Well, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, and of course,
because you did talk about revering the Lord. So do that in the past.
Absolutely. And I think we've got to be a little bit careful, haven't we, about taking Old Testament principles and translating them today, because the Levites, as you may know, that when Joshua went into the Promised Land with the Israelites, and you got the 12 tribes. Every tribe was given a portion of the land, apart from the Levites, right? They weren't given a big area of land. What they were given was cities and farmland dotted throughout, because they were the priests, and so they were supposed to be spread among the people. So they were supposed to be out. And so because they were the priests, and they were the ones who kind of ministered to God on behalf of the people, it was the people's responsibility to look after them. And that's why, that principle is there. Don't forget the Levites. Okay. And I think in the same, when you kind of translate some of that principle into the New Testament, it's, don't forget the resources of church and so on. Don't forget the staff of the church, especially Sam and, all his work here, in the tithes and offering. So, we celebrate, but we celebrate together. So I think you kind of translate that principle a little bit into the New Testament, but definitely celebrate, and definitely have, have a wine or a beer.
Alcohol-free nations as well.
Within reason, obviously. And, any other thoughts or comments about this or anything else?
I think that illustration which you read to us,
the kayak,
yeah, and the relevance of really the timeliness of these disciplines to actually assist us during those times of struggle.
Sure.
To me, that was a new dynamic.
Yeah.
It's really been focusing on that bit of tape rather than maybe 2/3. And so my thoughts being, okay, that's new and fresh to me, but what about other people within the BCC family being made aware of that?
Sure. Yeah.
You have to preach it, mate.
It would be lovely to have some preaching along these doctrinal lines, or like you've given us over these few weeks from the pulpit. I call it pulpit.
Yeah. No, I hear what you're saying.
Would.
Yeah. That's really
One question on the disciplines.
Yeah.
So, do you think you should do them all, or just the ones that edify you and make you feel, seem to help you with your spiritual journey?
That's a great question, Matt. I think.
Could there be seasons for all of them?
I think there could. I think there's going to be seasons for different ones. I think there's an extent to which we should do the ones that we find the most difficult, because that's what our soul most
what makes it
needs.
discipline as well, isn't it?
Again, not to stretch this analogy too far, but with the guys training for racing or the guys training for kayaking, it's in fact, this guy, even in that book, Wayne Cordeiro, the kayaker, he talks earlier on about going to the gym, and he does 10 reps on the pushing the, I don't even know what that's called. That's how unfit I am. Pushing the bar up. You know what I'm talking about. He does 10 reps, and then he's exhausted, and he's got a trainer next to him. He says, "One more, give me one more." So he gives me one more. He says, "No, give me one more. Just give me one more." He says, "This is where the muscle is being built, right? Because it's when it's being broken down and rebuilt that's where the growth happens." It's so that, in other words, and what he talks about is, it's not in the first 10 that the growth was happening, although they're needed to get there. But it's when you get to that breaking point that your muscles start to break down. That's when you start getting stronger. If he left it at the 10, he wouldn't get stronger. So applying that to spiritual disciplines, and I think you can, I think we have to do the things that most break our pride, our self, not just for the masochistic element, but because actually, if fasting is easy, it's not going to grow me by doing it.
Right. But if you think of, let's suppose you were, you're running a I don't know if you're working in a corporate world, working
Yeah.
working in a city, a big bank, they'll go, right, tell me about your staff, what their weaknesses, let's train their weaknesses.
Yeah.
And you kind of think, well, that's kind of like the opposite of what you should do. Because if I employed Mo Farah, what I want him to do is to do running, and if his time management was useless,
don't care.
I wouldn't be putting him on a time management course. I just want him to run faster and faster. So he's down that route. So then you're making a really excellent runner. Yeah. But like, so I know.
Yes, I get exactly what you're saying there. But I think, we can't stand before God, I don't think, and say, I'm no good at praying. I'm really good at fasting, so I did fasting and I never bothered praying. You see what I mean?
Yeah. But then, like, okay, my own personal situation. Yeah, I quite like a long walk and a nice quiet. Yeah, I can do that fine.
Yeah.
So this is what a fasting looks like with me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Day one. Yeah, wake up, don't have a coffee. So first day I have water. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's still there until about midday of day two.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then basically you're a bit hungry.
Yeah.
You're a bit angry with people. Yeah. And then right, you
totally identify, Matt. It's so true.
You've had loads of water, so
Yeah.
all you're going to do is just wee all the time.
Yeah.
Every time you sit down to do
Yeah.
anything, come to day three.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you still still a bit angry, still a bit hungry.
Yeah.
And then you're weeing all the time. And it's not because you focus on all the wrong things, and it's like, and you get and you wonder why your poo's that colour. Well, that's how it happens when you don't eat the food.
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel like you get to the end of it, and all you're thinking is, well, at least I lost 4 pounds.
I totally get what you're saying, and I would have exactly the same reaction to fasting. But I still think it's breaking something in us. It's breaking self-reliance. It's breaking my ability that I think I can do it on my own. It is still training your soul. I would say that the disciplines that are harder for us, and it'll be different, for some people, the idea of going out for a walk in the country, they'd be like, oh man, I can't face that kind of being alone. It'd be different for different people, right? But the disciplines that are harder for us start to break our ego, break our self-reliance, break our pride in a way that the disciplines that are easy don't.
But the feasting, for example, it's very easy to do, but
Sure.
I don't particularly find feasting particularly spiritually edifying or as part of a discipline on a journey.
Sure.
It's not probably not even thought about it that way.
Sure.
So that wouldn't necessarily be one which I would be drawn to from a spiritual perspective, because it's just I love an all-you-can-eat buffet. Don't get me wrong, but
Sure.
but it's not. But it doesn't feel so spiritual.
I mean, I think that the discipline of feasting really is part of joy and celebration. The feasts in the Bible were remembering the goodness of God, and that can be a discipline. And the reason why I think that's important, you're absolutely. It's not, Matt, about I go and have a great buffet. That's not the discipline of feasting. That's just I'm going out for a meal.
That's about
Yeah. The discipline of feasting and joy is I'm being thankful and I'm having this meal, and I'm recognizing that this is a provision for God. In the midst of hard times, I'm still growing thankfulness and joy, so that what am I doing through that? I'm training my spirit. I'm training my spirit that during those hard times, I'm going to be joyful, and I'm going to find strength in the joy of the Lord. So there's a training of the spirit that happens, even in and I would still argue, perhaps most in the disciplines that we don't find easy. There's a training of our spirit that takes place, I think, in those disciplines. We talked about solitude last week, and solitude's not easy, but there's an ego-crushing element to solitude that I think we miss if we say, well, it's not my what would be the word? My favorite discipline. So I'm not going to do it.
I'm not saying it's not the favourite. I'm saying
Well,
it's not doesn't seem to be doing much for me.
Yeah, and I think I would still say that it is doing things. I mean, your example of fasting is a great example. I still think that is doing something for you. I think
there's an intentionality in it. Again, I know we've said it almost every week, but drink loads of water means you go into wee loads. Then there's been intention on that. Okay, I'm going back to the toilet, but guess what I can do while I'm going to the toilet? Because of what I've put my body through is a quick, I'm having a wee again, God, and just whatever. Fasting doesn't seem to be doing anything for me because I'm weeing again, so I'm not doing my job. I don't seem to, I am talking to you, that's quite good.
But there has
There's
to be
the
a
intentionality
purpose.
to take a.
There has to be the purpose in the spiritual discipline. And it could be, because you won't go to the gym and say, right, okay, so say fasting, and it's difficult because of how or what have you. So you just do, right, initially I'll miss one meal. But there's got to be a reason why you're missing the meal and what you're going to do with that time that you were eating, what you're doing with it.
Mm-hmm.
Not thinking, oh, I got this. So you've actually got to be intentionally doing something, because you don't go to the gym and say, I haven't been to the gym for 5 years. I'm going to try and push 100 kilos. Well, no chance. You'd be lucky if you push 20. So you don't start on something that is very difficult. You start the journey, and there has to be the purpose. Because if you go for the hardness, you could take yourself out big time and actually lose the focus. Because I think, I mean, having done some gym work, and I'm still doing, I've built up, but I'm not where I would like to be. But I can't go and do. I watch people thinking, well, they're doing twice what I could do. But they've been doing that probably for, I mean, my eldest son. I mean, he'll do twice what I do, but he's been doing that for 10 years. He hasn't got there by doing it on day one. So, but I think there has to be a purpose with the spiritual discipline of why are we looking to do the spiritual disciplines, for what purpose? Our purpose is to get closer to God, and for why are we fasting? Is what's the purpose behind the fast? Not just the fast. What's the purpose? We want to get closer to God, or there is something specific we want. And I think not the point of thinking, right, oh, that's your mind's gone on to something else. And yes, same with having a quiet time. How often you have a quiet time and then you start thinking, oh, I've got to do that in a minute, and that. And I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, I'm meant to be praying now. But I've now gone way off. I'm thinking about, oh, I've got that to do when I get to work and this. But we all do it. But I think that, to me, it's as the guy with the kayak, he trained intensively to do that one race. The race was 5 hours. He spent hundreds and hundreds of hours to get to the place so he could do the 5 hours. So what's our purpose for the spiritual discipline? Not just thinking, I'm going to fast this week. Well, why? Unless you have a purpose, to me, why are we fasting? You've got to have a reason to do it.
And it's not to impress God either.
No.
Because that sometimes comes.
Oh, yeah.
Because we used to have church
Yeah.
fasting and praying, and it was for a purpose. Like we wanted the building, so they said we come together to pray.
Yeah, but I mean, the purpose can just be, seeking more of the presence of God. And I think, again, with something like fasting, is it does expose our. And I have exactly the same experiences. I get to a certain point and all I can think about is what I'm going to eat when I finish this thing. But I think even that exposing of that carnal thought process is a healthy thing, because it's bringing to the surface my reliance on physical food and just how base I am and how in need of His grace I am. It's bringing some of those things to the surface. So, I mean, to go back to your original question, I think I would still say that there are seasons when we need to think about all of this as a kind of combined diet. I think it is the spiritual disciplines, certainly all the ones that we've been talking about. I think they probably should be part of our experience. That's my feeling. I think they all have a part to play in growing in us selflessness, pursuit of Christ, humility. I think they all have are ingredients in that mix of becoming Christ-like. That's, for what it's worth, that's what I think.
Just
Go on.
Oh, okay. No, I thought, well, how would you tie that in with, say, like the parable of the talents, where they say, well, you've got these are your strengths, and even with the canoeist, if he was born without arms, I would have recommended a different race.
Sure.
So it's also how would you tie it in with that?
Yeah. I think the with the parable of the talents, I think that's about resources, what resources we have, and not necessarily. I'm just not sure that relates to the spiritual disciplines.
But you could have a resource which means that you're particularly good at staying focused in your
absolutely, and the different spiritual disciplines are going to appeal to different one of us. But the commandments of God, we don't pick and choose based on our character.
No,
but
right?
I think also, Tim, in the respect that you can have that attitude that I'm good at this, but unless you go out of your comfort zone, you don't really fulfill your full potential. Because in my journey of life, I thought I could do this, this, and this, but then I've been put in a situation which I've been uncomfortable about. But then I've realised I've actually got an ability I wasn't aware of because I've been put in a situation which I wasn't comfortable with. And I think if you just focus on the spiritual disciplines where you feel comfortable in, you'd never reach your full potential.
Because I think also on that, I mean, we go back when Rufus went to South Africa, and we went out. We went out with faith that God wanted to use us, but we really didn't know what was going on out there. If we knew what was going on and what had to be done, you wouldn't have picked the 9 people who went, because we were preaching where there was a lot better preachers than we were, but we were put in a situation where, because of it, we grew within it with God's help and faith. And without it, you would have never known. Because if you said, right, we're going to lead services, we're going to preach, we're going to do all sorts of differing things, you'd have said, these 8 people aren't the right people. They haven't got the talents.
Although, some of our talents were used, but there were.
Well, yes, but there's still better preachers and better people who could have
not,
done that, who it wouldn't have been such a, it was more of a struggle.
No, best person to speak to would be Mum.
Yeah.
Did they have their heart in it? They had their heart to go do
Absolutely.
Your heart's in it.
We all felt, that's the thing.
We
all felt
wanted to go,
do
but it was the fact that actually we were doing things well out of my, I don't know. I'm not a great preacher at all. I'm quite happy to talk in a small group and discuss things, but as a preacher, no, don't put me up front. It's not my. But I preached 3 times.
Yeah.
In the main service. So I think it's a matter of one, trusting in God that what He wants for you isn't just using your talents. Because if you use your talents, that you can then become blasé with, well, where's God in this? Because I can do this. Where's God in that?
Yeah, I think in a sense with a discipline, what you're doing, if you have a talent, not a talent for discipline, but you've got a discipline which is where you can feel, you're looking for the presence of God. So some people will find some disciplines easier to access than others.
You're right.
And I think that's absolutely true. I completely agree. I still think that there's value in, what are the areas that I struggle with, and in just the discipline of doing something that isn't natural.
Probably reflect a weakness in your, your spiritual maturity in some way. Yeah, don't you think? And that's where some of the different aspects you've talked about have a particular spiritual quality to them, or an outcome, don't they? Like fasting, I think fasting, that's when you mentioned that. That was, in a sense, it is about saying no. It's like delayed gratification, isn't it? It's saying, I will say no to this, but as Simon says, you're saying no to a purpose. Actually, one of the purposes is to be able to tell yourself that you can
Yeah.
say no
Yeah.
Yeah.
to the flesh,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I can say no, I'm not going to do that. So perhaps in a situation, not in necessarily eating, but in another physical desire, say, that you were placed in a place of temptation, you might have more spiritual strength to say no.
Mhm.
Yeah?
I think the
You know
kayaker
what I
brings
mean?
that
So-
out, doesn't it?
Huh?
Mm.
The kayaker brings it out.
The
when
kayaker,
he was
yeah,
on
his
his own
training.
in that 4th hour
Mm.
of the fight, on his own, where he felt, I can't go on anymore, that strength of all those things that he'd done. Because when he spoke about it, very little was to do with kayaking. It was in the gym, it was running,
Yeah,
it was all the other bits for that one.
And it would be
Specific.
pretty holistic, wouldn't it? Because of the muscles.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
But he didn't do a time management course, but it is that.
But he didn't just go on the water and kayak.
Yeah.
And if that was his
Okay.
purpose, he might have given it priority.
Sorry.
Yeah.
If it was needed.
Yeah, he did. He did. Okay. Any other final thoughts or comments or questions? Should we wrap it
I
up?
was going to say that when Jesus was on the cross, he got to the last middle in the middle, and he said, "Father, help me to get through this." You know, on the cross when he was,
Did,
why be
In
forsaken?
Gethsemane.
he prayed, Father, help me to get through this.
Not to forgive them. No,
Forgive
no,
them.
Forgive them. I think
Yeah. Yeah.
He got to that last bit,
Yeah.
and he wanted.
Yeah. Just to help to get through. Yeah.
He gave him
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good.
the bigger thing.
Well, thank you so much. Yep, I hope this is interesting and helpful. Do keep the notes if you want them. And yeah, you will get sometime, somewhere around now, magically, while we've been speaking, an email would have appeared to you asking for a bit of feedback, which would be super helpful for us. It is all anonymous, but it'd be helpful if you could fill in those online. And the kayaker, it's a guy called Wayne Cordero, and the book is called Sifted. Yeah,
That's a challenging book, actually.
have you read it?
Yeah.
Cordero, Cordeiro.
That's right.
Spanish?
What have I got by?
I don't know. He's American, I
It's
think.
American, Hispanic.
Good. All right. Thanks so much.
I did.
Thank you.
You're right.
Yeah.